Expect to see a few zombies, ghosts, and all sorts of different characters wandering the streets tonight. It's Halloween. I wonder, are you someone who celebrates Halloween, or do you go, that's American rubbish? Well, it could also be Canadian rubbish. It's not only American. I wonder if you do cater to the trick-or-treaters who knock on the door tonight. It's a favourite tradition in the US and in Canada. It's becoming a growing tradition here in Australia too, where increasingly there are costumes supplied for kids and adults, and more stuff you can do to decorate your house. Andrew Olson is a man who was born in America, grew up in Canada, came to Australia in 1995, now lives in Hamilton, and he's come into the studio to tell you why he's keen on Halloween. G'day, how you doing, Andrew?
Hello.
Thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
You do, well, we in Australia do think of Halloween as an American thing, and there may even be some resistance to it in Australia because it's an American thing, because there's a kind of an American cultural imperialism thing going on.
Yeah.
I wonder if people in Australia would warm to it more if they kind of thought, oh, hang on, it's Canadian as well.
Well, it's actually neither. You know, I don't think either country can lay claim to it if you understand the origins of it. The thing that I love about it is that it, first of all, it's very, very strong in our culture in Canada, but the origins of it go back pre-Christian times. It's and they are older than any other of those regularly celebrated event that we have in Western society.
Older than any other celebrated event.
Yeah. Okay. So the original is widely accepted, and there's a lot of different opinions, but I'm going to try and touch on the widely accepted origin, and that is the Celtic festival of Samhain, which was basically the passing of summer into winter, or light into darkness. And that was a very critical time for them, because basically when harvest was done, you were looking at what you had to basically survive on the winter. And that was basically, and the winter and the darkness became a very trying and troubling time. Anyway, so they celebrated that. And they also thought that over the previous year, all the people who had died during that time were still alive in spirit and needed help in that transition.
Who were these people?
These are the Celts.
The Celts.
So the Celts that lived in the United Kingdom, Ireland, Scotland, northern France.
Yes.
That area. Quite Anglo, you know.
Yeah.
Much of our origins. In fact, many of our forefathers long ago, 3,000 years ago, could very much have been involved with the Samhain festival. Then,
as Christians have done for many of their festivals, they kind of went, if you can't beat them, join them. Adopt that tradition into something that the Christians wanted to have on their calendar.
Well, as it happens, first of all, the Romans got involved, right? Because they went up there, and apparently there's speculation that a couple of their festivals merged into it to make it a bit more festival. More entertaining.
More festive.
Festive is the word I was looking for. And then followed a few hundred years later, the Christians came in, and they tried to eradicate paganism. They tried to move the pagans over to Christianity. And then one telling point was in 800, around the year 800 AD, one of the popes implemented All Souls Day on the same day of Samhain. Well, basically, it was a church-sanctioned replacement of the Samhain Day, recognizing the deaths of the people who died in the previous year. And that was their attempt, again, to try and bring them over to Christianity.
Yes.
But a lot of the festivals and activities still continued. They still wore costumes. They still made sacrifices. So it was a slow progress. And eventually they did ban it.
Just going back to Samhain, what costumes did they wear? How did they celebrate it?
So back then what they did was they, to placate and appease the spirits so they weren't tormented by them, they would dress up in costumes similar to their old relatives, or costumes of animals, things like that. It was pretty primitive. But what they would do is they would take gifts and food offerings to the edge of the village and leave them there to try and steer the spirits away from the village.
Yeah.
Okay. And that sort of is a carry-on, and the offering of that food is sort of a carry-on to the food that's offered today, some of the origins of the trick-or-treat. So on All Souls Day, a lot of these rituals still continued, and they were still infused.
So hang on, the trick-or-treat, a ghoul appears at your door, and you give the ghoul food in order to make it go away. And that comes back to you leave food at the edge of the village in order to dissuade the...
Yeah, so the origins of that sort of carried on over the past 2,500 years, and derived from that. Now, what happened in All Souls Day, and again, a lot of this is just sort of, it's all derived from these origins. On All Souls Day, they used to hand out All Souls cakes, and so that was again an extension of where it came from originally, and that led to the in part to the trick or treat activity today. I'm brushing over a lot of the history behind it, but what's interesting is when it came to North America, it actually didn't really kick in until about 1920. But interestingly, it kicked off in Canada a lot sooner than it did in America.
Really?
Yes. So the first reported writing of the word trick or treat was in Canada, in Alberta in 1928, and the first I'll get my facts here straight. So 1928, trick or treat in Alberta, Canada, and the first recording of guising or disguising, which was the word I think used in Scotland at the time, was in Vancouver in 1898.
Okay.
In Canada, and I think the reason that was in the United States there was a lot of it was heavily repressed by the very rigid Protestant environment.
Yes.
And they didn't, because they deemed all of this to be a pagan ritual, and they tried to replace that with festivals around people from the Bible.
Actually, now you mention that, it is strange that it is so big in the United States, because I know there is quite a lot of backlash in the US against things like Harry Potter, for instance. Yeah. They don't embrace magic to the same extent as maybe some other cultures do, because they take this kind of stuff rather seriously.
I think neither in Canada or the United States there's anything serious about it. It's purely an opportunity to have fun. Yeah. And just that one day of the year where you can just dress up like an idiot and get away with it and have a lot of fun. I've had nothing but fun associated with all the activity that I've done. Yeah. Just to follow on that vein there. So what happened is from 1920 onward, a lot of immigrants came over. You had the Irish famine. So from about 1850 onward, a lot of more immigrants came over, and then it sort of picked up, and it got that groundswell from about 1920 onward to 1950. It then became the full Halloween that we see today. But in Canada, it was very much a part of our culture. A $1 billion industry, second largest holiday in active festival in Canada.
$1 billion. So what is the $1 billion?
The $1 billion is the money spent
on costumes.
Yeah, costumes,
decorating houses.
Yeah,
what do they
candy. Do? Treats for the kids. Yeah, decorating houses. Yeah, that stuff and costumes. Okay. And after I did my trick or treating spell as a child, we had Halloween costumes in parties in high school. And then in university, we would have a whole week of activity. Julie can account for that, of costume parties.
Julie Baird.
Baird, yes.
Mutual friend who's just got back from visiting Canada and her childhood.
Yeah. And I've enjoyed some really, really fun parties in Sydney as well. Yeah. And I've seen entire streets shut down in Sydney for the Halloween, for haunted house competitions, and they shut the whole thing off, and it's just one big massive festival.
Which is still really quite new here. This is kind of exponential growth of Halloween festivities here in Australia over the last. It started with an increasing number of kids going around trick or treating.
It started by expatriates.
Expatriates from the US,
from North America,
In
fact, when I was living in Bondi, we were instrumental in that, and it was a bunch of Canadians that started taking their kids out to houses that had agreed to do it. We would put up a piece of paper, say if you want to participate, put it up in the window, and they stopped appearing more and more year on year.
This is now something that's increasingly happening as well. Don't go to any house, go to houses that have the sign up in there,
or a jack-o'-lantern, or
some signal to indicate I'm part of this.
Yeah. One of the
Does that happen in Canada too?
No.
It's just a free-for-all. Okay.
One of the best parties I ever went to, Halloween parties, was held at Mortuary Station in Sydney. Yeah. A place where they originally used to say goodbye to the departed and track them off into the bush. And it was a Halloween party held on the station platform. It was fantastic.
Yes. What are you up to tonight?
I'll be with my children. Yeah. I'll be with my youngest, and we'll be out trick-or-treating.
When is that'd be happening reasonably soon, I imagine.
As soon as here it happens a little bit more in light time. In Canada, where it gets dark when it's getting into winter, it's definitely dark, a little cooler.
Yes.
And here, I take a little while to get used to the fact that we're doing it during the daylight.
Yeah.
But it's all right. You get to see.
In Canada, would kids be going around on their own?
Oh no.
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 When you were a kid, did you go around on your own?
No. My mother would drop us off at the end of a street. And usually a busy street with there's lots of other kids.
Yeah.
The same control you'd have with, of your kids anywhere you went.
When you say dropped off, it's not just around your own house neighbourhood.
Yeah. So I lived on a farm, but the town wasn't far away.
So
you got a better hit rate in the town,
of course,
in the suburbs,
of course.
right?
Yeah.
So we would go in there, and she'd drop us off at a cul-de-sac or something. We'd go work that neighborhood, and then go work the other block, and. It was wonderful.
Tell me more about the tricks. Here, kids show up and they're all dressed, and you give them lollies. If you don't give them lollies, there are no consequences.
Yes.
But there are at least theoretically supposed to be consequences, aren't there?
In theory there are, but you face the wrath of the children if you demand tricks from them. But what I have experienced here, though, is usually you'd like to have a little engagement. The kids come to the door, and you fuss over the costumes that they're wearing, and you talk to them and try to make it less transactional. But no, the trick card's never really played. But originally in the 1950s or 1920s, what the thinking was that if you didn't give a treat, they would play a trick on you. Because there was a lot of mischievous activity associated with it historically. Yeah. Playing little pranks and stuff like that. And I dare say as a teenager I was involved in things involving rotten eggs.
Well, they are supposed to be the evil demons that you're keeping away by giving them food. That's right. As you go back to thousands of years of history.
That's right.
Fascinating, Andrew. And there's so many interesting things about it that I didn't know. One, that it is strong in Canada. Two, that it was stronger in Canada before it was strong in America. And three, a bit of the way that it's done here. Yeah. Which is growing, as I say, growing and growing and growing.
Yeah. It's, look, we're not a lot of people here say, look, it's American or it's not our culture. And it's, well, it's my culture and I live here and I'm going to do it. You don't have to. It's just, but I just like to share with people my knowledge of it so that they understand just, you see a child walking down the street in a costume, and it's just a recognition of our superstitious past that we've come from.
In the States, incidentally, Andrew Olson is with me. He's a local now after having lived in America and Canada. In the States, as I understand it, adults will dress up on this day to go to work. So work will be a fancy dress.
We have fancy dress at my office here today. Yeah.
You're not wearing costume. You should have come in here in costume.
Yes.
What would your costume be? Wait. Yes, rip the face off. Andrew, great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Really interesting conversation.
Thank you very much for your time.
That's Andrew Olson, who is a local, spreading the word.